Does the government work for us, or do we exist to serve the government? Is it lawful, moral, or constitutional for the government to take from some of us and give to others? Tonight, the Constitution and the Entitlement Society. Last year at this time, the country was embroiled in a debate over health care reform. It was basically a collective judgment by voters and our elected representatives about whether it is right and proper for the government to require all of us to have health care insurance, and whether it is right and proper for the federal government to require the 300 million Americans who do have health insurance to pay for the health insurance of the 30 million Americans who don't. Those who believe with me that the Constitution means what it says. Those who believe with me that there are areas of human behavior immune from government regulation. And those who believe with me that the federal government may only lawfully do what the Constitution authorizes it to do, we lost that argument. Today, the debate has shifted to the state level, and the issue is whether it is right and proper for state governments to give away benefits packages to state employees in return for the votes of those employees. This debate is now raging in Wisconsin, Ohio, New Jersey, and Indiana, and it too goes to the heart of government in our lives today. Here is the question. Is government a trust, a tool that should be used carefully to preserve freedom, and used only when moral, constitutional, necessary, and proper? Or does the government exist to do for people what they can't or won't do for themselves? This is classic Jefferson versus classic Hamilton. Their argument played out in modern times and on a large scale. The history is well known. Until the Civil War, the federal government stayed out of the lives of most persons and concerned itself mainly with the exercise of its 16 delegated powers under the Constitution. After the Civil War, federal troops occupied the South for 12 years, during which nearly all local government authority needed federal approval. A young college student at Princeton later studied the impact of the federal micromanagement of people's lives during this Reconstruction period, and he liked what he saw. He grew up to become president, and he ushered in the Progressive Era, which brought us government ownership of schools, the personal income tax, the Federal Reserve, the emasculation of the states as sovereign entities and laboratories of freedom, government-financed birth control, prohibition, segregation of the military and the federal workforce, Jim Crow laws, and the horrific treatment of blacks. He was the former president of Princeton and the former governor of New Jersey, Woodrow Wilson. He was a monster. A disciple of his was FDR, who outlawed ownership of gold, raised marginal tax rates to 90%, and brought us Social Security. And a disciple of his was LBJ, who brought us Medicare and Medicaid. And a disciple of theirs was George W. Bush, who federalized education and gave us TARP and wars paid for on a credit card. And not to be undone, a disciple of all of theirs, President Obama. He's increased the central planning of the economy, regulated the manner in which each of us receives health care, and added $4 trillion to the government's debt. Government just keeps growing. Its services just keep costing more. And people, good people, are lulled into a false sense of security. The government will take care of me. And an immoral sense of entitlement. I have a right to government care. This entitlement culture has brought us to a blind spot and to an abyss. The blind spot is that the government can just take what it wants from those who work and give it to whomever will politically keep the government in power. The blind spot is that people grow accustomed to relying on the government. The blind spot is that people vote for those in government who will give away the store. The abyss is bankruptcy. The abyss is that the feds and the states cannot afford these bills any longer. The abyss is a culture that has confused what the government does poorly, does far more expensively than what the private sector can do and what we can do for ourselves. The lesson is competition. Let people choose what services they want. Don't force them to buy health care or schooling or anything else from a government that can't balance its books and can't deliver the mail and just wants to stay in power. Tomorrow, why do you need the government's permission to get married? Governor Mike Huckabee will be here on the demise of the so-called Defense of Marriage Act, and Senator Rand Paul will be here on his book, The Tea Party Goes to Washington. From New York, defending freedom every night of the week. So long, America.